Is a recession here, or is it coming? Is it imminent? Is it going to happen? Who cares? Well, you should, I should, we all should. It might be here already. It might not be here already. Is it going to affect you? Well, it might, so what can you do? That's what we're going to discuss. Typically, I have what I call Dollar is Dead episodes 3 times a week to keep you on your toes with respect to the fact that the dollar goes down in value because of things like inflation. So we want to look to maybe some other assets to preserve our wealth. And every Friday we go over a basket of goods to do that. Recently, in the last probably month or two, I've done quite a few shows on emergency funds and savings. It's sort of a interesting balance between wanting to get out of debt as fast as you can. And I have a lot of episodes on that. That's how I started this channel. Help people get out of high interest rate debt. At the same time, what about the balance of savings in case maybe you're a dual income family, maybe you're not? And what if you or both of you lose your jobs? How long can you last before you start missing bills and payments, affecting your credit, and God forbid you go down that road of potential bankruptcy? So that's when your emergency fund comes into play and you're going to have to use your savings. Well, so there you go. And sometimes I went through getting out of a substantial amount of debt myself years ago. It's why I started all of this channel. You've got a balance between getting rid of that debt, but also having some savings. You don't want to have $0. So if you were to lose your job, you're done in just a week. How much do you save? How long do you save for? So this is Thursday. And the reason I'm doing this extra episode on Thursday is because I read a recent article that I thought was well written. And it's an opinion of someone who works for MarketWatch. And what's interesting about the article is that they go through things that we've been talking about for a very long time with regard to emergency savings. So if you would, smash that like button so we can get this message out to more people. And I always appreciate it if you subscribe. It shows me that you do appreciate the content and the time I put into it. So take a look at this article, and then we'll talk about what you can do to prepare. This article is interesting, this opinion article. I like them sometimes because obviously it's someone's opinion, but they talk a little more as if you're having a conversation with someone. And they're pointing out, hey, what if the economy's already in recession, but no one bothered to tell us yet? That's very interesting. I think he's saying in a roundabout way, the media's making everything look fantastic, even though the numbers and stats really aren't. Look at this first thing here, and we'll go through this article. Tuesday's bad news on job openings, just the latest in the growing shift in bad economic data points. All right, what do we look for when we're trying to figure out, is the economy doing well or not doing well? And obviously, if you think the economy is not doing well, like myself, you might hedge a little more in terms of saving, particularly maybe some dollars with respect to your emergency fund. There's all sorts of things I'll just throw out here. A 2-year and 10-year treasury inversion. We've got, real estate asset bubble, it looks like. However, we are in an election year, but we've got stagflation. Unemployment's up, GDP's down, and inflation is up. So there's a lot of signs flashing. And as he mentions here, this might be a reminder to check your finances in case a recession has either arrived or is just about to. Exactly what we've been talking about. He throws out the have emergency funds to keep you through 6 months. Now, if you're like most people, you see 6 months and you think, good grief, what do I spend every month? Times that by 6. There's no way I can save that much money. Well, there are things you can do, and I'll get to that after we get through this article. And then, of course, he says, which I thought was a great line, the natural human instinct is to ignore this stuff until it's too late. We all procrastinate, right? And then to kick ourselves for not acting sooner. I love this line. This is suboptimal. All right, Tuesday's figures showed that the number of job openings, listen to this, in the U.S. plunged by 300,000 between March and April. In just 1 month, 300,000 job openings vanished. Job openings are volatile month to month, but the trend is unmistakable. Here's another one. This chief economist at the commercial bank said they're down 4.1 million from their March 2022 peak. 4 million job openings vanished between March of 2022 and now. Then the Atlanta Federal Reserve, their estimate of economic activity, in other words, products and services, our GDP, what are we producing as a nation? If you've got less businesses and less workers because you're in a recession, then you're producing less stuff. He says it fell by a third. That is substantial across the entire U.S. Now, they talk about the Purchase Managers Index, and it says here it's another major economic barometer. So in other words, these are the things we look at, the statistics, the barometers as to whether or not we are or going into something like a recession. They say is now at levels seen during the early 2020 COVID-19 crash and the 2008 global financial crisis. Well, if you're around during then like I was, it was brutal. This reading has been consistent with recession 100% of the time in the past. I've heard that many times about various statistics where they say, wait a second, 100% of the time that this happens, we've been in or are going into a recession. And this is just another economic indicator. Then they talk about retail sales. Retail sales, what is that? You go to a store, you buy some clothes, that's a retail sale, right? Consumers buying a product, that's a huge part of our economy. We're lower than a year ago, even when you strip out inflation, and they said the same for industrial production. People are buying less, companies are producing less. Not good. And they've been deteriorating. Now, of course, he hedges this and says, well, none of this means a recession is guaranteed or even imminent, which is true. And he talks about here, this is what I find interesting, during that time, the yield curve has been inverted in the last 2 years, meaning the interest rate on Treasury bills, short-term and long-term, have been higher than the rate offered by longer-term bonds. And you say, I don't know what that means. I don't really care. Well, there's a 2-year Treasury and a 10-year Treasury that they compare. And when they're inverted, the interest rate on the short term has been higher than the rate on the long term. Now think about that. That's odd. That's like going and getting a CD at your bank. And they say, if you give us money for a month, we'll give you 5%. If you give us money and you lock it up for 2 years, we'll give you 2%. And you think that makes no sense. Why would you give me less money over the long term? Well, because it's predicting the future. This is another indicator that every time this has happened, we've been in or we've been going into a recession. Now, here's what matters. And he points out the danger is that many individual households will be unprepared if or when it comes, meaning they won't have an emergency fund. That's why I'm doing this particular episode about maybe looking at the way in which you're allocating your monthly dollars in terms of savings and in terms of paying down debt. Now, on the one hand, if you strictly looked at your savings as a vehicle to generate income, okay, that's scenario A. And that would be the case where you'd say, well, I'm paying down 24% debt, or I could put the money in a treasury and maybe get 4 or 5% on my money. Well, I'm looking at how much money is going out the door in interest, because you've watched some of my videos, you use a calculator, you see how much of the payment's going out in interest, and you say, I'm losing way more money than I'm going to make investing it. Therefore, I'm not going to invest right now. I'm going to get better return on my money by paying off that debt. Makes total sense. That's scenario A. Scenario B is, well, I've got this debt, and yeah, it's high interest rate debt, and I'm working to pay it down. But it looks like we may not be in good economic times, and that means there's a higher probability that I could lose my income. It could go down or away. If that were to happen, I'm not looking at this money as an investment. I'm looking at it as an emergency savings, which you should always have. This show is never financial advice. I always need to say that, but that's what I do, and that's what we talk about on the show, particularly every Friday, right? How much money do you have in your emergency fund? So now I'm thinking that I need to point out that we are in what I would believe to be scenario B, which is where you need to start thinking about these dollars, at least in the short term, until we get through some of these economic woes. This is an election year. Typically in an election year, things kind of just stall or stay the same, and the government can do things to make pictures look a little rosier than they are. I'm not saying they do that, but it's possible. So we don't know what's coming this year or next year. You may want to look at making sure that you're balancing the paying of debt and keeping money in emergency savings. Now, ideally, you would know exactly how much emergency savings you need, but you don't. But what can you do? I'm going to put videos, links to 3 videos that I made. I'll show them here, and I'll put the descriptions down below. I really hope you take a look at them. There are 3 videos I did on budgeting. The first one just helps you determine really quickly how much money are you actually spending on a monthly basis. You can get that number within 5 to 10 minutes. And then you'll know, okay, that's what we're doing right now. Times that by 3, you know how much you have to save, or by 6. You're going to look at it and you might say, that's a daunting number. What am I going to do? Okay, take a look at these other 2 videos. One is just showing how to determine your emergency budget and how to make it last longer. So in other words, instead of having to save that number times 6, you might only have to save half that number times 6. That would be ideal. Your money would last longer, or your 6-month fund could last for 12 months. How to stretch that out. Because what you don't want to do, obviously, is start missing payments, particularly payments on things like credit cards, car loans, installment loans, personal loans, home loan, you name it, it hits your credit and that stays there for a very long time. The last one talks about how you can prepare now to try to get your expenses down so that when you do need that emergency fund in the future, if it comes, you can drop to a lower monthly level of expenses. So take a look at those 3 videos. I think I'll pin them down below. And I would appreciate your comments as well. What are you doing? What are you doing in these economic times with respect to savings versus debt? Thanks for watching. I hope this is helpful. And I'm really just here to educate and maybe entertain, but more importantly, help you get out of debt, help you save for the future. And now in these economic times, let's make sure you've got your emergency fund and you're ready. Tomorrow being Friday, we'll go over the commodities and the basket of goods to help preserve your wealth. Have a great day.